Hello and welcome to the Hibs Observer Edinburgh Derby preview with myself, Liam Bryce, joined by Patrick McPartlin to look ahead to Sunday's clash with Hearts at Easter Road. We're going to take a very specific look at this game and basically we're going to try and puzzle out how David Gray might line up his side for what is another huge game. Just as always, before we get started, folks, a word for our sponsor, Good Vibes Giveaways. They're proud to sponsor the Hibs Observer and offer fantastic prizes to fans of the club. Prizes will change weekly and include tech and gadgets, days out, weekends away, tax-free cash and even Oasis tickets. So get your tickets now at www.goodvibesgiveaways.com. So, Patrick, another huge game. They just keep on coming at the end of a 3-game week for Hibs. And obviously, it throws up some questions in terms of team selection because, the team that started against Dundee United on Wednesday night was, 10 out of 11 was the same that started on against Celtic at the weekend and put in, a pretty incredible effort. I think by the end of it, Wednesday night's game, you could see that there was a few guys who, kind of had the lead legs on, who'd really kind of emptied their tank for the second time in a few days. So it's just now, whether David Gray feels a need to change it up ever so slightly. I mean, I don't know about you, but you might think completely differently. But I don't expect wholesale changes. He doesn't really have the options to do that at the moment. But you've got to think there's probably been a plan in his head for this week as to how he's envisaged he's going to line up his teams. I think it was a very deliberate move, for example, to leave Kieran Bowie on the bench, kind of freshen him up. That was his first start against Celtic. So, I mean, it raises questions. Not too much scope for change, but, the physical condition maybe of a few players might require switching it up a wee bit. So it's an interesting one to try and predict, isn't it? So we'll maybe, should we start from the back? I think there's a few positions that take care of themselves. But if we maybe take the defence and the goalkeeper as a whole, what are you thinking?
I haven't really seen an awful lot to suggest that there needs to be any changes unless there's any injuries or knocks picked up in the game against Dundee United. Obviously, you've got 3 games in 7-8 days, where you've got the intensity of the performance against Celtic, and then how long Wednesday night's game was as well. I think it's just about making sure everyone's kind of come through that game, and unscathed in one piece. You mentioned there about the power of effort that you've been putting in, and watching the players kind of running on fumes at the end of Wednesday's games. Wednesday's game when they've been playing, sort of like 90 plus minutes on Saturday, and then another kind of 70, 80, 90 plus on Wednesday night. But I think one thing about this team is that it's very athletic. I think it's very fit. Just in general, I think you see players that are able to go for as long as they are going. Which has obviously made a difference when you look at the number of late goals Hibs have scored. And I think that's something that David Gray's been working on, is just having a team of players who are fit enough to be able to go 3 games in a week. Because we've seen this before with Hibs teams in recent seasons. They've maybe had a good result on the weekend, and then nothing to kind of write home about in midweek, and then maybe a draw at the weekend might be a win in other circumstances. So I think a lot does hinge on how the players have come through Wednesday night. But at the same time, it's an Edinburgh derby. You think there must be a lot of players there who, desperately don't want to miss out on being part of that, whether it's, starting, whether it's coming off the bench. And I think a lot of the time for these games, adrenaline is what gets you through as well. So, there may be, that might come into it as well. It's who can sort of like handle the occasion best, who will be able to drag themselves through it. I think, when you look at Rocky Bashiri hurtling back to the goal line to clear that effort from Jota against Celtic, and then sort of shouting at the referee and then getting subbed off. I think that kind of tells you like how this team is operating at the minute. That team spirit. They will. I think I forget which player it was, but somebody early this season, might have been Rocky, might have been somebody else, basically said that it was Jack Iredale. Jack Iredale saying that he would go into battle with his teammates. And, it sounds like a very cliche football thing to say, but I think that just sort of sums up the kind of team spirit that they've got. And that, if there's 1 or 2 players flagging towards the end of the game, then they've got, 9 or 10 colleagues to help sort of drag them through it. And I think that's what we're seeing quite a lot from this Hibs team. So I think on that basis, I don't think you change the goalkeeper. I don't think you change the back three unless you have to.
It's very settled, that back three now, isn't it?
And that's sort of understanding for Jordan Smith as well. You've seen how much of a difference that's making. How much sort of comfortable the defence are. They know where everyone's going to be. Yeah, there's still the odd moment here and there. There are a couple of hairy moments on Wednesday night, but you can maybe put that down to tiredness or just the kind of having the 3 games inside the week. Nobody's perfect. So there are going to be mistakes and errors. There's certainly fewer individual errors than there were at the start of the season. And quite often, if there is a mistake or if somebody does, muck up, there's somebody else there to kind of tidy up. So it's less impactful than it has been. So I think it's having a kind of good backbone, having a good spine, has been key to this run that Hibs are on, and that obviously starts with the goalkeeper and the defence. And I think you look at the understanding there, and you just think, even when they were bringing Lewis Miller in to kind of cover at right centre back instead of Warren O'Hora, that was still, it still worked as a unit. It still worked, as a strong kind of defensive collective. So. I think David Gray will be thinking the same. That's certainly one area of the pitch you don't want to change unless you absolutely have to.
Yeah, I think it's probably the area that you would say is least likely to be switched up, just because that 3 have gelled so well together. There's such a nice balance there, and obviously Jordan Smith brought an added level of sort of security and trust behind them. So I suppose, if you look at the wing backs, Nicky Cadden, so influential so far this season, you'd expect him to play. But I suppose on the other side, it's maybe the one, one of the kind of positions one of few positions on the park where you would say, if everybody was available, you wouldn't be able to, I think, kind of confidently predict who David Gray is going to pick there, because there's times where Chris Cadden's had a run, there's times where Lewis Miller's had a run. Seems to be Miller's turn at the moment, but Chris Cadden played, unless I'm awfully mistaken, he started in the last Edinburgh derby. He started at Tynecastle. Mm-hmm. So again, that's a difficult one to predict. I'd maybe, Miller, he seems to kind of maybe prefer him for some of these. He preferred him against Celtic. Is it he a preference in these sort of bigger games for his, his athleticism, his presence? He gets forward. You could argue that I think Chris Cadden's maybe more secure in possession. Doesn't maybe turn the ball over as much as sometimes Lewis Miller does if he's having an off day. But that is that kind of area where there's still you could make a real case for either.
Yeah, I think you're right. And what I think is interesting is that Lewis Miller started against Celtic. The last game he started prior to that was the 3-3 job at Rangers at the start of January. And I think that, you made a good point there about them being almost sort of suited for certain types of games. And I think Miller sort of certainly seems to thrive on the big occasion. Not always positively. I mean, he's certainly, as you say, very athletic. He's a threat at set pieces.
Yeah.
Having that additional height when you're defending set pieces as well is useful. He's good at sort of like rampaging forward, but as you say, there's sometimes a tendency to maybe like turn the ball over. And I still think he loves a slide tackle a little bit too much. I think there's certainly times where you think you didn't need to slide tackle that one. That was, and sometimes you can see him thinking about it. He's thinking, I can stay on my feet, I can check out the player, I can go in and do a slide tackle.
It's just too tempting.
But I mean, joking aside, there is a real argument for playing either. I think with Cadden, you have some sort of consistency, and I think, you kind of see when Boyle drifts wide, I think the two of them sort of link up quite well. But we're saying it's another big game. It's probably going to be a bit of a battle as well, and I think it's interesting that Miller kept his place for the Dundee United game on Wednesday night. I thought that might have been one where Chris Cadden might have come back in, but I suppose if you're David Gray, you don't want to be changing players all the time. You don't want to be rotating unless you really have to, and you maybe look at the way Miller performed against Celtic, and I've been critical of Miller at times this season. There's been some games where I felt he's not really had his head in the game, and there's certainly been mistakes. Even if you look at the last derby, Easter Road, he kind of switched off at the back post, which allowed James Wilson to equalise. So it's that sort of thing will probably be at the back of David Gray's mind when he's thinking about his team. And I suppose it's just about in some level it's about weighing it up and saying will the positives he brings to the performance of the team outweigh the risk of any negatives. And I think it's obviously like that with a few players. But it seems very difficult to call. I wouldn't be surprised to see either of them start. I think I wrote a piece about David Gray's use of substitutions, which went live on the Hibs Observer site on Friday morning. And I think looking at that, it's quite clear that he's putting a lot in this sort of approach of the 11 that starts the game is never the 11 that finishes the game. And it's not so much about having substitutions, it's about having finishers. So depending on how the game's going, Miller could be a good option to have off the bench, or Cadden could be a good option to have off the bench. And I think it just depends on how David Gray wants to play it, how what game plan he's got in mind. But I think as well that there is an element to when it comes to Derby, you kind of want players who kind of understand what it's about. You want players who know what it means. I'm not saying that Lewis Miller doesn't at all. I'm not saying that any of the Hibs players there don't get it, but. Cadden, I think, has obviously played in a lot more Edinburgh derbies than Miller. Something would probably be along with the stats to say it's like equal or something like that. But it feels like he's played in a lot more Edinburgh derbies than Lewis Miller, and I think he's a kind of safe pair of hands almost. And it's just whether or not you want to sort of eschew the safe pair of hands for the kind of unpredictable benefits, if you like, that Miller might bring in. But it's one that I think is really difficult to call. Lewis Miller, he's very fit, Lewis Miller, and that's I think obviously why he started and played. On Saturday, played on Wednesday night. It's whether or not, having not had that run of games behind him. He's had substitute appearances, between the Rangers game and the Celtic game, but it's whether or not being asked to play that much that many minutes inside a week is going to be beneficial, whether if you're getting into that third game, whether he might start to flag a bit early. So that's something else to think about. That's why you've got the sports scientists in there to kind of scrutinise who's recovering well and things like that. So that's something else that might come into it. But I think it's a really nice selection dilemma for David Gray to have, and obviously whoever starts, he's got a very good player in reserve who can come on for the last sort of 15-20 minutes and sort of still maintain a sort of strong presence on that right side.
Yeah, I'm sort of leaning that. I think myself, I'm maybe leaning a bit more towards Cadden, maybe getting the nod. I think you see Miller's played 2 games in the space of a few days, having not started, as you said, since that Rangers game. Cadden, as I was saying, he started in the last Edinburgh derby. Hearts, I felt that day there was a real concerted effort from them to try and attack down that side with James Penrice and Blair Spittle, and I think they get very little change out of Cadden that day. I thought he had a really solid game. He should have scored as well, as his brother Nicky has brought up a few times in press conferences. For me, maybe I'm kind of thinking towards Cadden, but at the same time, you wouldn't, not to plonk myself firmly on the fence, you wouldn't be overly surprised if he does stick with Miller. But yeah, I think the point you apply there to Miller about, will they fancy putting him through 3 huge games in the space of a week, having not had much of a run behind him to that point? I suppose in the middle of the park, that the obvious one that applies to is Nathan Mariah-Welsh, who's been very good in the last 2 games. He was very good against Celtic. His off-ball work was excellent. Again, he was, really energetic at Tannadice on Wednesday, and that's not to, because as well, I think he was one of the few players on the night who was actually getting his foot on the ball a wee bit, and looked at, showing a wee bit of composure in an otherwise quite, a game that was kind of lacking it. I was quite impressed with that element of his game, because I think that there is a perception around him sometimes, he's the sort of typical midfield terrier, who just kind of, is there to put himself about and kind of get at people, but he kind of showed a nice side to his game. But again, it's like he's had even less bank of minutes behind him than Miller. So again, it just, we know Joe Neal's going to be, he's still a bit away. Alassane Amane is, you'd be very surprised if, that would be a real wild card decision from David Gray to throw him in.
Would be.
For that, I can't see that happening. I don't know if you go with Kwon, to be honest. I've not, I kind of not seen enough from him, to be honest, to kind of suggest that you need guys in these games who are going to make an impact. And I think Kwon's biggest issue in a Hibs shirt has been he can be neat and tidy, he gets about the park, but he doesn't really have significant impacts on games for me. So again, that kind of takes you back to, Dylan Levitt's obviously been struggling as well. It takes you back to Mariah Welsh. And does he ask him to go again?
I think he does, and I think it's also probably important to point out that Mariah Welsh hasn't done anything really to warrant being taken out of the team. If he's fit and he's ready to go for another 75 minutes, then the shirt is his, as far as I'm concerned. I think he's performed quite, or he's kind of got quite a good partnership in there with Triantis, and I think we've said this about Nectar Triantis and quite a few players, that he seems to form good partnerships with them, and I think that's says a lot about Nectar. It says a lot about his
brings good things out of other players. That does say a lot, doesn't it?
Exactly, and I feel. I mean, it's mad when you think he's still 21. I know he's going to be 22 soon, but still such a young player. But I feel that depending on who he's playing with in the midfield, that kind of influences how he plays, and I think that's quite a sort of talent to have at such a young age, especially in a position that I'd say probably 18 months to 2 years ago maybe wasn't one that you were playing regularly. So I think that in some ways must be great for David Gray to have, because he knows that whoever he plays alongside Triantis can adjust the way he plays to sort of almost, kind of fill in the bits that his partner doesn't have, but also allow them to, to kind of focus on their strengths in midfield. One of the sort of, enduring criticisms or kind of complaints, if you like, about the Hibs midfield in recent seasons has been there been too many similar players in there. Mm-hmm. And, we've seen that in some games where you've got, two, sometimes maybe even three players who they all seem to be performing the same functions or similar functions. And I think, you talked about Kwon there and being neat and tidy. I look at his size and I just think, that does seem to be part of the reason why he's maybe been brought in, is to get a bit height in midfield, like him and Triantis, I think 6'3", maybe 6'4". You've got height at the back with Ekpiteta and Rocky. You've got height up front with Bowie and Kujarevich. So it feels very much like he might have been brought in as a, just I suppose that a bit of, I won't say physicality, because he's not a bruiser, he's not an enforcer or anything like that. But he's got that height and just a bit more of an imposing figure. I mean, you look at Mariah Welsh, who's a lot more. I feel he's almost more of an imposing figure, despite being a sort of smaller in stature. But you make a good point about Alassane Amane. It'd be a real wild card to throw him in for his first start in a derby. It's happened before on both sides, and it's worked. It's worked wonders in some cases, and others not so much. And as you point out, I think it's about who's on form. It's about who can sort of do what's required in a derby. And I think you could say there's maybe a role for Kwon off the bench, possibly, depending on how the game's going. But I mean, he didn't come off the bench on Wednesday night, and I don't think. I mean, certainly not Triantis, and I would say not Mariah Welsh either. Neither of them have done anything to warrant, being taken out of the team. Obviously, fitness depending. But I think, that's 6 points out of 6 with Triantis and Mariah Welsh playing as a duo in that midfield. I wouldn't see any reason to change that.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree. So just to round us off, I think, it feels like if, I know he was knackered by the end, the time he came off on Wednesday, but you think...
We were all knackered on Wednesday.
Yeah, we are. Emotionally drained. I think Josh Campbell, he'll play if, if he's come through all right. David David Gray obviously prefers him in these big games. He gives you so much off the ball. And he's kind of, I think, in terms of that defensive discipline, he's really kind of taken to what is expected of him and what his responsibilities are. I think he kind of saw it perfectly against Celtic that there's emphasis on him getting forward as he did to great effect, but then there's the defensive side where he often drops in and makes it a sort of more flat midfield three where required. So you think Josh Campbell will play. So then up front, it's Martin Boyle's been captain of late. You'd be surprised if he drops out of the team. Mikola Kugarevich started and scored on Wednesday night, but Kieran Bowie obviously came on and scored. To me, it looks as though I would think the plan would possibly be to not give Bowie as many minutes on Wednesday night deliberately. He was brought on to try and impact the game, and obviously he did. He's going to be flying now. I would be surprised, if he doesn't start now on Sunday. I do think that Kieran Bowie will come back in for Kugarevich as that kind of final piece of the team.
I think it is. I think it's perfectly understandable when you saw the effort that Kieran Bowie put in on Saturday against Celtic in his first start, and I think he spoke afterwards, and it was, how was that? I'm knackered, and I think you could see that. Like, you could see he'd really kind of put an awful lot into it. And he's obviously he's young. He's got that athleticism. I think he's naturally like a fit guy. And when he's been building himself up after this injury, and David Gray was sort of constantly saying, we've had to kind of keep the reins on a little bit because he's desperate to get back. And you think that it might have been with a view to him coming back and sort of being in kind of peak condition for this run of games. And Hibs are just such a different beast with him up front. Said it after the Celtic game, said it after the Wednesday night's game. And, it's just what he brings to the team, this hold-up play. Even if he's not scoring, he's heavily involved. And, I think it'd be difficult for Kugarevich. I think he took a bit of a while to get back up to speed after coming back from injury. He looked pretty ordinary against Clydebank. I thought he looked better against Ayr United, but still, struggling a little bit to get into the game. And, maybe not so surprising that he was sort of taken out the side a little bit. But I thought, there were still moments on Wednesday night where, maybe, if it had been Bowie, then, the ball might have stuck. There might have been, more sort of opportunities for attempts on goal. But I thought he did well overall, took his goal well. And, I think that's good for him. That'll be a sort of a confidence booster for him. He obviously scored in the last derby as well. So there's that element of it. And, if you've got your two sort of strikers who are probably vying with each other for a starting berth and both scoring in the previous game, they both played a role in previous two matches, which have ended in sort of comfortable wins, well, fairly comfortable on Saturday. I say that's not true at all. Neither of them were comfortable. Ignore me. Two wins and hard games, we'll say. Getting cocky now, 6 points out of 6. But I think, there would be an argument for starting Kugarevich against Hearts and saying, well, he did well against Dundee United from the start, and then you bring Bowie off the bench when, the Hearts defence are maybe tiring because they've also had the 3 games inside a week. But at the same time, that is an awfully big risk to take. Mm-hmm. And similar as to what we saw on we saw Hibs do it against Celtic, and then I think we saw Dundee United do it against Hibs. That sort of fast start, getting something early on. So I think it sort of comes down to which player's going to give you sort of, the better chance of having a fast start, not necessarily by scoring themselves, but just by being able to be part of something like that. And I think I think everyone out there would be saying Bowie. And I think, you get another sort of 60, 65 minutes out of him. You then got Kugarevich who can come on and kind of still maintain that sort of, having a big lad up front to, so you can play high balls to them, but they're also quite good at the ball at their feet. We look at set pieces as well. Hibs with their 15th league goal from a set piece against Dundee United with Kugarevich's header from the corner. So, they're both threats from set pieces, defensively good to have in the team. And but I go back to what I was saying at the top of the video, that it really is just you've got 11 starters, but then you've got finishers as well, and it's how do you want to finish the game? How do you want to play how are Hearts going to play as well? How are you going to seek to kind of nullify their threats and play on their weaknesses? But I agree with you. I think it looked very much like the minutes that Bowie got on Wednesday night, and the fact that he didn't start either looked like David Gray had almost already made up his mind about a team for Sunday, or he just wanted to give himself, put himself in a situation where arguably either striker could start and couldn't have too many complaints. But I just think, I go back to what I was saying before about Hibs looking like a totally different beast with Bowie up front. And I just think, derbies can so often be attritional no matter how the two teams are playing. And sometimes, you just need a bit of quality. You need someone who can produce something. I think you need someone who can, if they're given a one-on-one chance, that they take it. And I think, for that reason, Bowie is the one who's going to get the nod. He's look at the goal he scored against Dundee United in midweek. A very well-worked goal, but, a difficult, quite a tight angle. And he's got to try and get it across the goalkeeper and like high enough and wide enough that it's going to go in. And I think for me it's got to be Bowie starting up front. I thought him and Boyle actually worked really well together against Celtic. That's another thing to take into consideration. So yeah, I think for me it's got to be Bowie, but it's maybe not as easy as a decision as it might have been a couple of weeks back.
Yeah, definitely. I just wonder if that goal Wednesday night is the kind of moment where you're sort of like, I'm just getting kind of no choice but to sort of let Kieran Bowie off the leash now, because he'll take so much from that, I think. Because he was saying, that was one of the things he said after the Celtic game, he's, I just need a goal now. So you could tell that was, happy to be back, but that was already on his mind. So it was quite a time to get one. Who knows, it might pick up another one on Sunday, but we're going to leave it there for just now. If you're heading along to the game, folks, do hope you enjoy it, or wherever you're watching. Indeed, we'll be live at full time on our YouTube channel for an instant reaction, whatever the results. So do keep an eye out for that. For now, though, thank you very much for joining us. We'll speak to you again soon. I hope you enjoy your weekend. Cheers.